from a moral compass, you want to say the politically correct things, but it obviously geared up a lot of emotions on my part.
January 11th, 2019, during a routine check at Oklahoma State Penitentiary, guards found Anthony Palma lifeless, strangled with an electrical cord by his cellmate. He was convicted of killing Kirsten Hatfield, and he took the secret of her body's whereabouts to the grave. These are 8 baby killers instantly killed in jail. July 11th, 2017, the quiet of a small flat in Wakefield, England was shattered as Liam Dean, 22, lost control. His daughter, Luna, wouldn't stop crying. What happened next would tear his family apart and shake the United Kingdom. Dean, a young father with no prior criminal record, was left alone with his newborn while her mother, Karen Bissett, went upstairs to rest. Instead of soothing his daughter, Dean's frustration boiled over in a violent outburst. He later admitted to punching Luna in the face, squeezing her tiny arms and body, and violently shaking her. These actions left Luna with catastrophic brain injuries. The next morning, Dean told Karen that Luna had simply fallen. But when Dean's mother visited and saw Luna struggling to breathe, she immediately called for help. Paramedics arrived to find Luna's face badly swollen and bruised. She was rushed to Leeds General Infirmary, but doctors could do nothing. Luna died in intensive care on July 14th. During police interviews, Dean broke down and confessed to the attack. He pleaded guilty to murder, showing no attempt to deny responsibility. At Leeds Crown Court, prosecutors described the horrifying injuries. A doctor concluded that Luna died from severe head trauma. Dean eventually received a life sentence with a minimum of 10 years in prison. The court heard a victim impact statement from Luna's mother. She said,
"Seeing Luna on life support in the hospital will last with me forever. I can't describe how that felt. I would not wish it upon my worst enemy."
The community was shaken by the brutal crime. But prison life would prove even more dangerous for Dean. The man who killed his own daughter now had to survive among hardened criminals who despised his crime. Inmates soon labeled him a killer, and he faced daily threats and taunts. November 12th, 2017, at HMP Leeds, Dean's cellmate, John Westland, took matters into his own hands. Westland, already serving time for a and grievous bodily harm, used a broken bottle of aftershave to attack Dean in their shared cell. Prison guards later found Dean covered in blood at 5:30 a.m. He had suffered fatal injuries from the assault. Shards of glass with Westland's fingerprints were found near the bunk bed. Westland claimed he believed Dean was a offender, not just a killer. It was ironic coming from someone like Westland, and the judge later said,
"It is an unfortunate consequence of life in prison that those who are themselves guilty of serious offenses will find another inmate to look down on. Given the nature of your own conviction, some might find that to be rank hypocrisy."
During Westland's trial, jurors heard how Dean faced constant abuse in prison. He was in debt to other inmates and regularly called a baby killer. Westland showed no remorse for the murder, insisting he was serving justice. August 2nd, 2018, Westland was found guilty of Dean's murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 19 years. The judge acknowledged that while Dean's crime was heinous, he was entitled to serve his time without vigilante justice. Liam Dean's case highlighted the complex morality of prison life, where even the worst offenders enforce their own twisted code. But if you think this was disturbing, wait until you hear what happened when prison justice caught up with another killer. In 2013, on Valentine's Day, the iron doors of HMP Long Lartin in Worcestershire, England, thundered shut as 2 seasoned killers, Gary Smith and Lee Newell, stalked their prey. Subhan Anwar, a 23-year-old from Huddersfield, had no idea this ordinary day would be his last. He was serving at least 23 years for the murder of his partner's daughter, a crime that made him a marked man behind bars. Anwar considered Smith and Newell friends. He'd been at Long Lartin for 4 years, built relationships with inmates and officers, and even served as a wing representative helping other prisoners. But that morning, Smith and Newell's sinister plan began to take shape. They fashioned crude shanks from a pen and a toothbrush, then waited for the right moment. Just before 6 p.m., Anwar entered his cell with Smith and Newell close behind. The door slammed shut, locked from the inside. For 40 agonizing minutes, there was nothing but silence. Prison staff grew suspicious when the cell's peephole was blocked. Then, the intercom crackled to life. Smith told the control room,
"I have taken the guy in this cell hostage. It's not a joke. I think he's dead."
When asked why, he replied coldly,
"I'm bored. It was something to do."
When negotiators spoke to Newell, he delivered one chilling line.
"He is with Allah."
During that time, the duo acted in twisted normalcy, with Smith even making Newell a cup of hot chocolate with icing sugar. At 8:20 p.m., the cell door finally opened. The officers found Anwar lying face down on the bed, ankles bound with 2 meters of tape, strapped by his own tracksuit bottoms. A bruise on his forehead suggested he'd been punched. His right shoulder bore marks likely from the improvised weapons found discarded near the window. Later that night, a prisoner in segregation asked Newell about the attack, saying,
"Did you open his guts?"
The reply was haunting.
"No, it was his neck."
Both killers were already serving life for previous murders. Newell had struck his 56-year-old neighbor, Mary Neal, in 1988. Smith had murdered 22-year-old Ali Hassan in 1998, throwing his naked body into a quarry. Smith and Newell displayed almost no emotion in court. The judge who sentenced them said,
"One of the most chilling aspects of this case was the almost complete lack of emotion shown by either of you after the killing. There is, in reality, no mitigating factor in either of your cases."
The motive for Anwar's murder was clear for everyone. Even the judge noted the moral code within the prison population, a code enforced by violence, sometimes death, especially against irchat killers. Smith and Newell refused to attend their sentencing at Warwick Crown Court, but the judge had already made his decision, noting the complete lack of remorse and the brutality of the murder. He said,
"You have both murdered others before. On this occasion, you did so in a cold-blooded manner, having deliberately lulled your victim into a false sense of security."
The pair had also stolen Anwar's personal items, including prayer beads, a watch, and an earring, all small tokens of their dominance. Anwar's family maintained his innocence of the murder of his partners, toddler, and called Smith and Newell animals. But the court saw only a pattern of violence. 3 killers, locked in a deadly triangle of prison justice. As a result, Smith and Newell now face whole life sentences with no possibility of parole. But in the brutal world of prison justice, this was just another chapter. The next story is about a man who murdered over 70 girls until one fellow inmate thought enough was enough. January 22, 1930, Daniel Camargo Barboza was born in Analaima, Colombia. Nobody could have guessed that this boy would be a future predator whose unspeakable crimes would haunt 2 nations. But decades later, it would be the blade of his victim's nephew that finally silenced the monster of the mangroves within prison walls. Camargo's mother died before his first birthday, leaving him with a cold, distant father and an abusive stepmother. She humiliated Daniel by dressing him as a girl and forcing him to attend school that way. Despite these, he excelled academically, boasting a reported IQ of 116, yet family poverty forced him to abandon his studies. His descent began with petty theft. He was first arrested in Bogota in 1958. A failed relationship with a woman named Esperanza became the catalyst. When Camargo learned she wasn't a virgin, it twisted his perception of women forever. Together, they lured several virgin girls under false pretenses, with Esperanza providing the bait and Camargo abusing them. But their 5th victim reported the crime to the authorities, eventually sending both to prison. Prison did nothing to rehabilitate him. After his release, he kidnapped and murdered his first known victim. This set off a spree of violence that would ultimately claim between 72 and 180 lives across Colombia and Ecuador. Camargo's methods were calculated and cold. He targeted vulnerable girls, posing as a foreigner needing help finding a Protestant pastor. He showed them money as proof. Then once isolated, he murdered his victims, choosing virgins deliberately, as he claimed their crying gave him satisfaction. He justified his atrocities as revenge against women's betrayal. His first major arrest came after he returned to a crime scene to retrieve television monitors he'd left behind. And despite evidence tying him to over 80 murders, Colombian authorities convicted him of the murder of a single victim, sentencing him to 25 years in Gorgona Island prison. But Camargo's evil couldn't be contained. In November 1984, he escaped from the so-called Colombian Alcatraz, making authorities believe he died at sea. Instead, he surfaced in Ecuador, where his killing spree accelerated. Between 1984 and 1986, he murdered at least 54 more girls. The brutality was so shocking that police initially believed a gang was responsible, unable to comprehend that one man could commit such carnage. His capture came almost by accident. In February 1986, 2 Quito police officers noticed his suspicious behavior just minutes after he'd killed a girl named Elizabeth. They found a bag containing her bloody clothes, her severed lips, and a copy of Crime and Punishment. Initially, he provided a false name, but a surviving victim was able to identify him. Camargo confessed to 72 murders in Ecuador alone, leading authorities to unrecovered bodies. His lack of remorse was chilling. He described his crimes in detail, showing no emotion. Yet, despite the immense scale of his crimes, Ecuador's maximum sentence at the time was just 16 years. In a cruel twist, Camargo found himself imprisoned alongside Pedro Alonso Lopez, the only serial killer who rivaled his body count at the time. But prison offered no sanctuary. On November 13, 1994, justice finally caught up. Giovanni Noguera, the nephew of one of Camargo's victims, stabbed him to death in prison, finally ending his bloody reign. To this day, Camargo's legacy remains one of horror, a testament to the depths of human depravity. His calculated methods, lack of remorse, and astonishing victim count make him one of history's most prolific predators. But if you thought Camargo's twisted reign was the darkest it could get, the next case will prove just how far evil can go both outside and inside prison walls.
Reportedly, his mother chose to bury him here in the prison cemetery, thinking that if she buried him on a public site, his tombstone would be vandalized.
March 20th, 1975, at Arizona State Prison, Charles Schmid, once known as the Pied Piper of Tucson, found himself cornered by 2 fellow inmates. In moments, he was stabbed 47 times, losing an eye, a kidney, and ultimately, his life 10 days later. But how did he get to this point? July 8, 1942, Charles Schmid was adopted at birth by Charles and Catherine Schmid, who ran a Tucson nursing home. However, his adoptive parents divorced when he was 4, and his birth mother rejected him outright when he tried to reconnect. Yet, despite his rocky home life, Schmid showed early athletic promise. In 1960, he led his high school to a state gymnastics championship, taking top honors in several events. But it ended when he was suspended for stealing from the school machine shop, never graduating. Schmid continued to live on his mother's property, receiving a $300 monthly stipend. Insecure and hungry for attention, he built a strange persona, stuffing his boots to appear taller, drawing a fake mole, and dyeing his hair to look like Elvis Presley. The act worked. He drew in a circle of followers and became known as the Pied Piper of Tucson. But then, his desires turned darker. May 31st, 1964, Schmid's first known victim was Aline Rowe, who was lured to the desert under the pretense of a double date with Schmid, his girlfriend Mary French, and friend John Saunders. There, he raped and murdered her, burying the body in the desert while French waited in the car listening to the radio. The following year, Schmid targeted Gretchen Fritz and her younger sister Wendy. Gretchen, the troubled daughter of a prominent heart surgeon, had been dating Schmid, but she became possessive after he confessed to killing Rowe, when she threatened to expose him if he ever left her. Schmid didn't like that and ended up murdering both sisters and burying them in the desert. Schmid's confidence grew over time. and he confided in his friends about the murders. Richie Bruns, fearing for his own girlfriend's safety, fled to Ohio and eventually told his family everything. His testimony would later seal Schmid's fate. 1966, Schmid was convicted of 3 murders and sentenced to death. However, when Arizona abolished the death penalty, his sentence was commuted to life. Prison didn't humble Schmid. He attempted multiple escapes, finally breaking out in 1972 with fellow murderer Raymond Hudgens. However, their freedom was short-lived, ending after holding 4 hostages and eating at a Sonic drive-in. This time, Schmid began using his time in prison. He developed an interest in poetry, corresponding with University of Arizona professor Richard Shelton, who recognized his talent. But his creative pursuits couldn't save him from prison justice. His grisly end came at the hands of inmates Jimmy Farah and Dennis Eversole, both serving time for violent crimes. After surviving the initial attack for 10 days, Schmid succumbed to his injuries and was buried at the prison cemetery. The next killer had once been released from prison, only to murder again. But then, a fellow inmate made sure he never got another chance. February 22, 2011, Colin Hatch, a notorious child killer, had been found dead in his cell at Full Sutton Prison, one of Britain's highest security facilities. He was 38, serving life for the brutal murder of Sean Williams. Hatch's death would send shockwaves through the prison system, exposing deep flaws and igniting renewed calls for justice reform. Hatch's criminal history began young. By 15, he was already a serial abuser of boys. His pattern was disturbingly clear: lure, assault, and leave psychological scars that would never fully heal. In 1992, he was jailed for 3 years after choking a boy until he was unconscious, an attack chillingly similar to what would come next. The judge had no option but imprisonment, despite a psychiatrist's warning that Hatch was a menace to the public and should be given treatment. But at that time, Broadmoor Hospital did not consider him dangerous enough for secure psychiatric care. But prison did nothing to change him. Just 11 weeks after his release on parole in April 1993, Hatch struck again. He lured Sean Williams to his tower block home in Finchley, North London. The violence that followed was horrifying, ending in Sean's death. A postman discovered the boy's body, wrapped in bin liners and dumped in a lift. Detective Superintendent Duncan McCrae, who led the murder inquiry, called Hatch
a frighteningly cunning criminal who had pulled the wool over the eyes of the authorities and would kill again if ever released.
Judge Nina Lowry agreed, declaring Hatch highly dangerous and stating there was no possibility he could ever be safely released. Hatch's conviction prompted a nationwide review of parole and probation procedures for offenders. Sean's parents, Lynn and John Williams, placed some blame on the system that had failed to protect their son. They said,
"Never again must a family have to suffer this experience, and never again must Colin Hatch be released back into our community."
In prison, Hatch was isolated. He became a pariah among both inmates and staff. The details of his crimes, spelled out in gruesome detail during his Old Bailey trial, made him a marked man. Yet, he survived 17 years in this hostile environment. But life inside was far from safe. February 22, 2011, Hatch's luck finally ran out. At 7:24 p.m., the prison service called police to report an ongoing incident. 43 minutes later, a second call confirmed Hatch's death. A 35-year-old inmate was arrested at the scene and later transferred to police custody. Hatch's death was met with little sorrow. Even in prison, his crimes made him an outcast. The manner of his death, killed by another inmate, may have been violent, but it ended a cycle of behavior that began in his teens. His case stands as a grim reminder of the system's failure to recognize and contain truly dangerous individuals. But if you think Hatch's story is dark, wait until you see the next killer on our list who dissolved nearly 100 boys in acid. October 8, 2001, at Kot Lakbat Jail in Pakistan, guards discovered Javed Iqbal and his accomplice Sajid Ahmed dead in their cells. At first, they thought it was a double suicide with bed sheets. But autopsy reports tell a different story. The bodies had signs of blunt force trauma and bruising, raising suspicions that these were not self-inflicted deaths. But to understand how Pakistan's most notorious serial killer met his end, we must first go back to the beginning. 1961, Javed Iqbal was born in Lahore into privilege as the sixth of 8 children in a wealthy business family. When he grew up, his father even bought him a villa and set him up in the steel trade. But behind this facade lurked a darkness that would eventually claim the lives of 100 innocent boys. By 1978, still a student, Iqbal had begun luring boys into his villa with false promises. Over the years, he expanded his reach, pretending to run a video game shop, fish aquarium, gym, school, and discount store. His victims were mostly street children, runaways, or beggars, kids society had already forgotten, making their disappearances easy to overlook. His methods were chillingly organized. Iqbal kept meticulous records of every boy, names, ages, and even photographs. He offered food, shelter, or work, only to assault and strangle them before dissolving their bodies in hydrochloric acid. When suspicions grew around him, he simply shifted to other businesses, opening new fronts for his horrific activities. Accusations of in 1985 and 1990 never stuck. His wealth and status shielded him, and Lahore's countless missing boys provided the perfect cover. It wasn't until December 1999 that Iqbal revealed the full extent of his crimes in a handwritten confession sent to both the police and a local newspaper. The details were monstrous. He described and dismissed boys before dissolving their remains in acid. He even left 2 large vats of partially dissolved human remains in his home for police to find. Inside his house, investigators also found bloodstains, the chain, and his meticulous records. In his letter, Iqbal claimed his murders were driven by revenge against the police. He alleged that after being accused of in the 1990s, he was brutally beaten by officers, leaving him crippled and his social standing destroyed. His mother's death from a heart attack after witnessing his downfall supposedly fueled his desire to make 100 mothers suffer as he had. After sending his confession, Iqbal disappeared, triggering Pakistan's largest manhunt. He hid in drainage tunnels and caves with the help of accomplices. Meanwhile, families of missing boys flooded police stations, desperate for news. Finally, on December 30th, 1999, Iqbal calmly walked into the office of the Daily Jang newspaper and surrendered, stating,
"I am Javed Iqbal, killer of 100 boys. Please tell someone in the reporting section that I have come to surrender."
The trial that followed was swift and decisive. Iqbal was convicted on 100 counts of murder. The judge handed down a sentence as brutal as his crimes. Iqbal was to be strangled in front of the victims' families, his body cut into 100 pieces and dissolved in acid, just as he had done to his victims. However, Pakistan's commitment to human rights treaties prevented this sentence from being carried out. Iqbal's accomplices were also arrested and convicted, including 3 boys who had helped him dispose of bodies and hide during his escape. While awaiting execution, Iqbal showed no remorse. He claimed he could have killed 500 children, but stopped at 100 to honor his pledge. He stated,
"I hate this world. My mother cried for me. I wanted 100 mothers to cry for their children."
Then came October 8, 2001. Iqbal and Sajid Ahmed were found dead in their cells but the autopsy reports told a different story, claiming they were both beaten to death. No one claimed Iqbal's body, and to this day, his death remains shrouded in mystery. But if you think Javed Iqbal's story is the darkest this world has seen, wait until you hear about the next killer, because he had murdered his own daughter. June 20th, 2016, the morning routine at HMP Long Lartin was interrupted by a brutal, calculated act of prison justice. In the stark reality of this maximum security facility, Sidonio Teixeira, a convicted killer met a violent end that would resonate throughout the prison system. 2007, Teixeira was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of his daughter and the attempted murder of his son. His crimes placed him firmly at the bottom of the inmate hierarchy, a position that often comes with deadly consequences behind bars. Long Larton Prison, located near Evesham, Worcestershire, houses over 600 inmates, many serving lengthy sentences for serious offenses. It's a place where justice is measured in years, but for some, retribution comes much sooner. On that fateful June morning, Teixeira entered one of the prison's workshops. Routine activities began as usual, but lurking beneath the surface was a calculated plan for vigilante justice. Another inmate, Victor Castigador, had obtained a rock from the prison aquarium, a seemingly innocuous object that would become the instrument of Teixeira's demise. Castigador, originally from the Philippines, was no stranger to violence. He was already serving a life sentence for the 1989 murders of 2 security guards, whom he tied up, doused in petrol, and set on fire during an amusement arcade robbery in Soho. In the days leading up to the attack, Castigador reportedly made threats to do something bad to Teixeira, and then he followed through. As the workshop session began, Castigador approached Teixeira. He had concealed the rock inside a sock, creating a makeshift weapon that would prove deadly. Without warning, he delivered multiple blows to Teixeira's head, inflicting severe injuries that left little hope for survival. Prison staff responded quickly, but the damage was already done. Teixeira was pronounced dead as paramedics arrived. In the aftermath, Castigador showed no remorse. He declared to a prison officer that Teixeira deserved to die, calling him a horrible man and a bully. His lack of regret was evident as he stated he would have killed him again if given the chance. Castigador later received a whole life tariff for the murder. Justice Haddon Cave, who presided over the case, condemned Castigador's self-appointed role and emphasized that it was not Castigador's job to judge others or punish evil. The court heard about Castigador's violent history, including a 2006 incident where he stabbed another inmate in the eye with a makeshift weapon. Detective Inspector Paul Hardman, who led the investigation, described the attack as brutal and unprovoked. He noted that Castigador showed no concern that his actions could result in taking another life, acting instead to settle a score in a calculated and vengeful way. While the court denounced Castigador, others in the prison system quietly celebrated him. In that world, right and wrong often bleed into each other, and justice turns easily into revenge. The next killer was also killed by another inmate, yet he took his secret to the grave, leaving a wound that will never heal.
I can't imagine losing your child the way that she lost Kirsten, and then to find out the murderer, who did receive justice through our court system, has now been murdered himself, and we still haven't found her body.
January 11, 2019, a routine security check at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary found Anthony Palma unresponsive in his cell. He couldn't be revived. At 59 years old, the man convicted of murdering Kirsten Hatfield was dead, murdered by his cellmate. But even this violent prison justice left a community with more questions than answers. Back in 1997, Kirsten Hatfield vanished from her Midwest City home. For nearly 2 decades, her disappearance haunted the community and her family. Palma lived 2 doors down from the Hatfields the entire time, seemingly without guilt or remorse. The case went cold until 2015, when DNA evidence finally tied him to the crime. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. For Kirsten's family, Palma's conviction brought some relief, but it wasn't closure. They still didn't know what happened to their daughter. The pain was still there, and so were the questions. In prison, Palma wasn't just another inmate, he was a killer. And in the prison hierarchy, that made him a target. His cellmate, Raymond Mano Pallado, was also serving a life sentence for first-degree murder. On that January night, Pallado took justice into his own hands. The medical examiner's report revealed Palma died from ligature Sitchan strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. Officials later confirmed Pallado used an electrical cord to kill him. It was a brutal end to a man who had caused so much pain for so many years. For Kirsten's family, news of Palma's death brought mixed emotions. There was shock, maybe even a sense of justice. But there was also heartbreak, because Palma took with him the secret of what happened to Kirsten's body. Chief of Police Brandon Claves, who worked the case for years, summed up the community's feelings best, saying,
"You know, my heart goes out to that family and to everybody involved in the case because there is no closure. It's still wide open for us."
Palma's death in prison might seem like justice served, but for those who loved Kirsten, the case remains open, the pain still fresh, and the hope for closure fading with each passing year.